Got it.
You got it?
I think so.
There you go.
All right. Just a minute. That doesn't like me. There it is. Woot! All right. Hi, everybody. As you can see, I guess now, I'm Jay Weinland. Audio director. I've held a lot of titles in my life, but the past 5, audio director has been the one I've carried most. But I've been called sound designer, sound artist, sound supervisor, audio chump, whatever, whatever that you would like. I come from Sound Lab. I'm currently working outsourcing, as opposed to being internal, but I'm not going to talk about all the games that I've made in the past. A lot of you know that I worked on the first 5 Halos, Destiny 1, Destiny 2, the first 5 Need for Speeds, the first 5 FIFAs, or FIFA 96 through 2000, whether that was the first 5 or not, I'm not quite sure. But in any case, I'm not going to talk about most of that stuff. But one thing I am going to start off with is showing you a little bit about what we do at Sound Lab. So this is about 2 minutes.
I am your papa! I am not lying!
So that's our most recent thing that we're sort of a hodgepodge of stuff we're doing at Sound Lab. It's pretty exciting. Before I start, I will say that I have about 50 minutes worth of material to plow through. I would prefer it if you hold your questions till the end, unless you feel some burning desire to throw me off my track along the way. But we'll leave plenty of time for questions at the end. So I'm making an assumption that that most people in this room know at least a little bit about game audio, know how audio fits into games, generally speaking. So I'm assuming a basic level of knowledge, and if I get too far afield, please make sure to remember to ask me a question at the end about why I left you in the dark. But I'll start with how I got here. I grew up in humidity, which is a good thing for today. So I grew up in Storrs, Connecticut, and the biggest thing about my early life, other than the fact that I'm a musician, is I love soccer, which is not rare, is rare for Americans, for people to say like, hey, what American likes soccer? We didn't have American football at my high school, and so I played soccer because it's the best game in the world. I see a lot of similarities between soccer and a lot of sports between and making games. Soccer is, they call, the beautiful game. I agree. It's 11 players that are constantly changing, they're constantly evolving, they're constantly reading each other's signs and to get to the right place on the field, to make the right thing happen, for the team to succeed. It is the perfect team sport, in my opinion. And so that's what I grew up in. Storrs, Connecticut. I went to Ohio. My next stop was Oberlin Conservatory. Like a lot of people that are I'm now going on 30 years in games, which I can't believe that's actually the case, but like a lot of people in games, I grew up a musician. So I grew up playing the oboe. So for those of you that know oboe players, we are all certifiably insane, just so you know. It's all about those little double reeds and having to carve the reeds and so on. Like, we are psychos, but we're also the ones that tune the orchestra, and also being part of a team in the orchestra is like the oboes that tunes the orchestra. We're the ones that helps bring everything together at the top. Did 2 degrees in music, one in oboe performance, another in music teaching, and I moved to Seattle. Spent a long time there, taught for a while, and then fell into games. And I thought my mother was going to fly across the country and beat me with a stick, because both my parents are professional professors and teachers, and they're like, "You're leaving a tenured teaching position to go work in video games?" I'm like, "I swear it's going to work out just fine, I promise." But I literally thought I was going to be killed at that point. During that time in Seattle, raised 2 kids, both actors. I don't know how, my wife's an actor as well, so I don't know how I ended up with this situation with 3 actors in my family, but there we go. In any case, once my kids went off to college and to go do their acting thing, we moved to Scotland, which was exciting. So for anybody who's lived outside of the US or lived in any other country, I found it a fabulous year. My wife didn't like it so much. She said something along the lines of, "You moved me from a cold, dark place that rains a lot to an even colder and darker place that rains even more." So in any case, that was a 1 year, and then we moved to Los Angeles, where I worked in, got a dip in mobile at Battlefield, working on Battlefield with industrial toys at Electronic Arts. My second time at Electronic Arts, and after they closed our company, I said Electronic Arts is not going to get a third time. So anybody that wants to hire me at Electronic Arts, no, I've been pooned twice, and I'm not gonna do that again. So here to Montreal, I very much thank Max for inviting me. I've been working with Audio Kinetic for a very long time. If you remember the very first Halo that came out, which was the first GDC Best Sound Design Award that I won for Halo 1, we almost immediately, Simon Ashby and friends came and visited us and said, "How did you do what you do? Because we want to make a product called Wise." And for the following 10 years, I met with them at every GDC, every E3, every so on and so forth. And they said, "This is what we're doing." And I'd bring my engine with, because I was giving talks at GDC at the time, and I'd say, "Well, this is what we're doing." And then they were slowly caught up, and we finally got to the spot where at the end of Halo Reach, which was the 5th Halo game, the last one that Bungie did, we said, "All right, we're going to do Destiny, we're jumping to Wise." So it's been a really, really great relationship with them, and for anybody that's not using Wise, I would highly suggest it. But most of the stuff I'm going to talk about is not specifically geared toward Wise, could be done with any particular engine, but I'll let you work out that problem. So what is this talk? I'll tell you what it isn't first. I'm not here to talk about how to make assets. I'm not here to talk about how you make your best gun sounds, or how to work on vehicles or anything. Plenty of resources out there for you to figure out how to make sounds. What this talk is about developing relationships across your game studio or across whatever game you're working on. It's about creating the relationships across the different studio disciplines to ensure audio success and melding audio into the game seamlessly through positive creative interaction. So I just reread what I wrote, but the bottom line is I've spent 30 years trying to figure out how to do my job well by learning how other people have to do their job. Because understanding what other disciplines' challenges are and how you can interact with them best is one of the hardest things about doing our job. Because it's not hard to make sound effects. I mean, it can be hard to make sound effects. It's not necessarily hard to implement sound effects, although it can be at times. But the hardest part is making sure that the interactions with the other disciplines are absolutely seamless and really cooperative. That's the key thing. So I'm going to talk about, this is my biggest philosophy at the moment. And and most people that are at the top of game companies will disagree with this statement. But I say audio is half. And for right now, I'm going to dismiss haptics for the moment. I think haptics have a lot of possibility, but they're battery wreckers. So if you're going to start to do a lot of haptic stuff in a battery-powered controller, you're going to wreck batteries. Phones, the same thing. You know. Anyway, I'm gonna dismiss haptics for right now. Not because I don't believe haptics are not important in our industry, and I think they will become more important. But there are only 2 human senses here, really, when it comes right down to it. 5 human senses, and there's only 2 of them involved in most entertainment. And that's games, movies, TV, whatever. You get what you see and you get what you hear, which means I think I'm half. Now, is half of the team audio people? No. Does audio team get half the money? No, absolutely not. But it is important to try to evangelize to the people that are further up the food chain to make sure that they realize that audio is half. Because when they do, then they realize that audio can make a game that looks great, audio can make it be that much better by supporting the sites that you see. A game that looks terrible probably can't be saved by good audio. But in any case, I just say go with the half and just say this is the most, you really need to pay attention here. And if your lead producers and your lead engineers, if they don't give a crap about audio and they leave you sitting off in the corner, which happens at many game companies, to say like, oh, whatever, those audio guys, they'll figure it out. I'm like, no, you need to recognize that we're a first-class citizen in what goes on in making a game. So here's one that's been not troubling me, but I've been thinking about a lot over recent years, because I'm not going to point to individual research, but a lot of the research that I've seen recently seems to narrow in on around 24 voices. So let's say somewhere between 20 and 25 voices is what the human ear and human brain can actually decipher. Once you get more than 25 voices, human brain can't track it. So if we realize that it's around 25 voices, then your key challenge as an audio director is to play the right 24 voices at all times. Because lots of game companies will say, Microsoft is great about saying, hey, Xbox can play 300 voices. It's like, what the hell are you going to do with 300 voices? Like, I'm sorry, but that's just not worth it. You have to count and focus on that main group of voices that you know that the ear is going to be able to understand as they go along. So that has driven a lot of my philosophy about how I deal with priorities and things, which I'm gonna get into here. But I think this is a key one to think about, because a lot of people just assume that more is more, and I say less is more in the case of audio. Put the right 20 voices in front of the player, and you're always going to get a better experience than playing 90 voices that are all just mushed together. So I actually, my title of this talk, which I forgot to put on my first slide, is An Audio Director's Life of the View from the Caboose. I was actually going to start at the front of the train and work through to the Caboose, but I'm going to start at Caboose. Everyone knows that, or I think everyone in this room will agree, that the audio team is the last creative car that gets into the station. So all the other cars in front of us, the animators, the environment artists, the designers, the engineers, they're all in the comfy cars up front. And audio's riding in the Caboose. We arrive last at the station. That's a given. So how do we take care of the Caboose first? I always like to watch out for your own house. So starting with the Caboose, I like to use a phrase called "Go West, young man," which is actually from a guy named Horace Greeley, who ironically has a statue at the base of my father's childhood street in Chappaqua, New York. But when I say go west, I actually mean go left. So if you know WISE, you know that there's columns of places where you can make decisions all the way along. And for me, I want to make decisions as best as I can all the way to the left. And what that means is a comprehensive actor mixers at the very start in your column that says, these are all the actor mixers that I might want. Weapons fire, weapons reloads, vehicles, footsteps, Foley, make up whatever you want. But I say it shouldn't be more than about 15 or 20. But you're going to say, I'm going to have 15 or 20 actor mixers on the left, and I'm going to make all my smart decisions there. So the key thing, going back to how many voices you can hear, is that you set priorities, and in WISE, right next to the place where you set the priorities in that very first actor mixer, you can say, this is the priority, but this is how far it gets de-importantized. No, that's not the right word. But the further away it gets from you, the less you can dial down the priority. So it says like, hey, a footstep in general, if it's my footstep, I'm probably going to want to hear it. So I'm going to put it at 80%. But over distance, I'm going to want it to go down to 10%, to be like only 10 priority when it's a little further away from me, because it'll allow other sounds that are next to me, like a bullet impact that might hit the wall next to me. I want to hear that bullet impact rather than that guy's footstep over there. So there's an area in WISE that you can find. It's in the advanced settings. But essentially, is in that very first set of actor mixers is a very comprehensive way to say, this is how ideally I want my priorities to work, but then here's how I deprioritize them over distance. To allow yourself to reach that magic, 24 number of saying like, I'm hearing the right voices and I don't want to hear the wrong voices. So these are the kinds of settings you can have there. Another one is you should do attenuations based on distance. So everyone knows you can set an attenuation on a sound that says, okay, here's the gunfire, and over this amount of time, it's going to turn down by this much, and maybe you're going to put in some EQ or blah, 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 blah. But you should really focus on making your attenuations based on distance only and not specific to individual items. I'll tell a horror story from one of the Halo games that I did not make, which might be Halo 4. But in any case, what I heard, they ended up, when they got into mix, they ended up with something like 280 attenuations that they had in their bucket. And that is a mixing nightmare. Like for anybody who even thinks about mixing a game, I want to see at most like 20 attenuations that are solely based on distance. Because sound, to me, you should be able to set those things and they all should react reasonably similarly. Roll off EQs, turn it down X amount, so on and so forth. You should be able to do this with relatively, with a relatively small amount of attenuations because that makes your mix easier. Because it means you're like, oh, we're getting a few too many voices here. All you need to do then is just to trim down that distance a little bit on an attenuation, and all of a sudden you've lightened the load on the tech requirements of your game. So yes, you must use share sets. Don't do custom stuff as best you can. I might as well bring up the next one. Oh, I'll bring up the next three. These all sort of go in a group. Use share sets. Don't do individual things. And if you're thinking about clicking an override parent, override parent is the devil. You should just realize that right now, because override parent means that you are now saying, I need to make a specific decision here. And that means that you're probably in the wrong spot in your tree, for one. And if you do plugins, don't do custom things necessarily, but if you do, use the burn-in. Because otherwise, the EQs or any other plugins that you're going to use in Wwise are going to be running real time and are going to hurt your performance in your engine. So it's fine to put custom EQs on individual sounds. I'm a big fan of doing work in Wwise after I've gotten the audio into Wwise. I prefer not to drop back to Pro Tools and redo it and get it in. If I'm like, hey, I just need a simple EQ on here, Wwise has got all the stuff in there. So does Fmod. So does everybody. It's not a thing. But don't run them live. Just make sure you use the burn-in. So if you're finding yourself needing to custom or override, your asset may be in the wrong place in the tree. So going back to my original statement of making a comprehensive set of actor mixers, if you're having to override parent or do custom shit, it's probably because you're not in the right place. Because ideally you won't have to override. If you've put your assets in a similar space to all the other assets, then they all need to share the same capabilities. And to me, override is like the old carpenters thing. They say measure twice, cut once. I say you should think about hitting that override button 3 times and then decide you're not gonna. But if you're gonna, you better have a really good reason for it. Like, and because these are hard things to track down later on. When you get into the mix stage and you're like, why isn't this thing reacting? It's because somebody clicked override parent way down in the tree and none of the things that you're trying to do are helping. So I think my last one here is make decisions that future self will be happy with. And avoid, and I'll tell a story of how I failed on this, avoid the fix it and mix thoughts. Because that's really common for audio people to say like, we mostly got it working, we'll fix it and mix. That can be really tough, especially because in games, Debbie can relate because our cohort Scott is up doing final mix on Transformers movie at Skywalker Skywalker Ranch, right? Yeah, they get weeks to mix. In a game, you're lucky if you get 3 days, maybe a week. So the better choices that you can make earlier on to make your mix more smooth, the better. So where I failed on this one, I'll just give a brief analogy because it's the only time I managed to get a title update for a game, which was for Halo 3. We we relied on that as we went. We just said like, hey, we're getting it all in, this massive game, so on and so forth. And we were given a pretty solid amount of time, 2 weeks to mix. But we got into mix and we started with weapons, and we got all the weapons worked perfectly. And then we worked slowly through the game, but it was an intense 2 weeks because we had left ourselves too much heavy lifting to do when we got to the mix. And as a result, by the time we got to the end and we put the game out, everyone realized that our weapons sounded wimpy. And the reason why they sounded wimpy is because we started with the weapons. And by the time we finished everything else and like, oh, bump this piece of music, bump this piece of dialogue, so on and so forth, we had overwhelmed the weapons. And if we had paid more attention along the way to making sure that things set perfectly along the way, that would have made that mix not nearly as destructive as it was. Luckily, we realized that it was a problem when we appealed to leadership and they let us put out a title update, which audio never gets title updates generally. But I said, look, I just need to change one number. I can show you right here. If I go change this one number in the weapons area and change it from a 3 and add 3 dB to make it 6, fixes the whole thing. And they agreed, which was nice. So as an occupant of the Caboose, the most useful thing that you can do early on in production and as you go is sit on the roof. Look at the cars in front of you. You can see which cars are on fire. You can see, whether one's messy or one looks particularly spiffy. Make sure you get on all of the groups that you possibly can get on. Anybody that thinks that audio doesn't need to be involved in discussions in games is wrong. Everyone needs audio in some way, shape, or form. Whether or not they even realize it or whether or not they're thinking about it, it's always time to reach out to every other creative discipline that's on your project and make sure that you have good lines of communication with their lead producers, with whatever their lead designers are, whatever, just encouraging them to say like, please let me know when you have audio needs and I'm gonna tell you when I think your stuff needs audio, but keeping those lines of communication open because they're not always gonna remember. Other producers of other teams are not always gonna remember that audio needs to be kept involved or informed. I have a funny story from Destiny where we finished a DLC and came into the office one morning at around 10 and we were through certification. So anybody who works on games knows that certification is a big deal. If you're through cert, it means you've cleared all your stuff, we're about to put it out, print the disc, do whatever. We're at the end. I get in at 10 and me and the VFX guy get a bug that morning that says, hey, the ice rink sounds like dirt when you walk on it, and it throws up dirt poofs when you shoot it. And the VFX guy and I looked at each other and we're like, what fucking ice rink? That's the depths of which it can go. They built an ice rink, they put it in a level, and they did the entire thing, and they never told VFX and audio that they were building an ice rink and that we needed to support the ice rink. And now we're already past cert, so in theory, this is gonna ship this way. Luckily, again, it helps to be part of a strong audio team because the VFX guy and I were able to go to them and say, just let us fix it. It's not that hard. Yes, we're past cert. You're going to have to break cert and you're going to have to re-go through cert again. But our other choice for you is you pull the ice rink entirely and just don't have the ice rink. So given that choice, they're like, all right, we'll let you fix it because they didn't want to pull the ice rink. But in any case, the communication is crucial and you can see so much from the Caboose. So yes, getting on all the key team and Slack groups you need, this is crucial. And I think it's lovely to tour the cars of the train from the back. So if you think about it, your producers and your lead engineers and everybody that's coming from the front of the train, it's like the ticket taker. If you've ever taken a train, I lived in Scotland for a year, so I took the train all the time. If you've ever taken the train, you see the ticket taker coming in through the front of the door and everybody's like, oh, gotta find my wallet, gotta do my thing, gotta make sure everything's spiffy and clean. Whereas if you're entering through the back of the car, they don't see you as a ticket taker or anybody important. You're like the guy cleaning out the trash bins. So you can get a vision of the car that no one else will see. You can see whether the car's organized. You can see whether it's dirty. You can see whether everyone's getting along or if there are fistfights breaking out in the hallways. Like all this stuff happens and you get to look at it going from the back to the front of the train. And that's a very useful observation, I believe. Because it gives you a view that the lead producers don't get. Because as soon as that lead producer opens the door at the front of the car, everyone makes their desk look absolutely perfect. And that's you get to see through that. All right, now I'm going to step back to the beginning part of the train. So if there's any more about the Caboose, the audio stuff, save it for the end. I'm happy to chat more about that. So in terms of trains, we have two kinds of trains that I'm looking at right here. We have a Shinkansen, or a nice bullet train on the left, and you have, let's say, a somewhat older train on the right. It's pretty useful to know exactly what kind of train you're riding on, for sure. So I'm going to assume it's more of a Shinkansen. So I'm going to talk about two departments that you might not think that I would start off with, but these are super important. So IT, one of the key things that you need to get with IT on is that it's really critical that your audio machines are all on the same subnet. So if you know what a subnet is, if you're at a home and you're on a Mac, it's 10.10. Blah, 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 blah. If you're on a PC, it's 192.168. You know, those are your local addresses. So those first 6 digits, those need to be the same because you cannot profile in WISE without being on the same subnet. So if you're home and you're working on your machine and you have your console here or it's on your PC, this is not a problem because you are automatically on your same subnet because you're on your computer system at home. But if the game is being tested and you want to profile into a running version of the game that's being run online or being run somewhere and you can't connect to that subnet, you cannot profile in WISE, which is the only way that you can really figure out what the heck is going on. This is a pretty key thing that a lot of people don't know, and it's just keep it in mind. I'm finding it on a project I'm working on today, so this is not something that's like was a problem in the past and now isn't. No, it's still an issue. Like you need to get friendly with your IT guys, and because they need to help you figure out how you can get the VPN running, whatever you need to do to be able to get your machine to be able to connect to the same subnet the game is being tested on. That's critical. So what do we get? So yeah, so same. Remoting into VPN, you need to be able to get to tunnel in the same network. Sorry, I already covered the next 2 things. So if you can, I don't know, how many people here are Mac users, just out of curiosity? So most of us, most audio people still do a fair chunk of Mac. Really useful to get to know who on your IT team knows anything about Macs. Because Macs have some tricky bits to their parts. I have a distinct memory of my first year working at Microsoft when we were working on Halo 1. I was still a contractor at the time, but Microsoft was new to making games, and for sure they were not Mac fans. I mean, this is Microsoft after all. Everybody's running Windows. But the IT guys in the building quickly realized that I knew more about Macs than anybody in the entire games industry at Microsoft at the time. So the IT guys would come to me and be like, hey, I'm having a problem with this one Mac user for blah, blah, blah. It was very interesting times. Eventually, IT guys have gotten better. Usually, you can find somebody with some Mac chops. Definitely useful to find out who on the IT team does have Mac chops so they can help you, disseminate difficult problems. IT is also, I'm going to get to QA, and before I start QA, I will say that these 2 departments, IT and QA, I regularly, I don't usually drop down to bribery, but for these 2 teams, when you get towards the holidays, you know that QA and IT is going to be working through the holidays while all the devs are sitting on some beach in freaking Tahiti or something like that. IT and QA, I usually tend to figure out what is their favorite libation and drop it off on their desk the day before the Christmas holidays, because those guys are going to be working the whole way. So I highly recommend being really nice to your IT QA guys. I usually find out what's their favorite whiskey, and I'll drop them off a bottle of whiskey before the holidays. Goes a long way when you have a really funky request in February. They're going to have fond memories of you for when they were sitting there working throughout the holidays. So on to QA. So QA is your friend. And a lot of people despise QA because they just create lots and lots of bugs. And that is true. There's that's a thing. But you need them to be your friend. And ideally, you can identify a QA member or more than one that has some interest in audio, has some ears, at least knows what they're listening for, and ideally would be able to install WWise so that when they're testing the game, they can profile. Because if they can get you profile captures. That helps your job immensely. And because if a QA guy says like, hey, you know, this sound doesn't work, and I'm like, well, I don't know why it doesn't work, because it looks like it. I mean, the more information you can get from QA, the better. So if you can identify somebody, and at times I've had up to 3 QA members all running Wwise all day, every day, and they're the ones that can help us find those bugs, for sure. Yeah, so getting somebody to learn how to profile in Wwise is huge, because the alternative is you will be the only person to actually be able to test and verify that your game is working. And essentially that means you're working 2 jobs. You're working a job that says, hey, I have to get the audio working, but then I also have to test and make sure that it doesn't break. And that just puts more pressure on you as an audio person. So being able to get QA to help you is an immensely important effort on your part. Don't think that QA is your enemy. A lot of people hate QA. I love QA because I need them to help me, because otherwise I'm the only person that can actually figure out what the hell's going on. I also like to make the line very clear about subjective and objective bugs. I only want to see objective bugs from QA. I want QA, it's objective. This gun should make a gun sound. It doesn't make a gun sound. That's a bug. I don't want a bug from QA that says, I think this sound sounds a little wonky. I'm like, that's not your call, man. You're here to tell me whether it works or not. I'll take something wonky from a lead producer or a lead designer or whoever. I'm happy to accept feedback of subjective sort from those folks, but I need QA to stay focused. I'll never forget the day that a QA person wrote a bug that said too much guitar wank in the lobby music or something like that. Now, the guitar wank that he was referring to was a session that we had just done the previous week with a tiny little guitarist named Steve Vai, who happens to be pretty darn good at what he does. And, and we moved mountains to get Steve Vai to appear on Halo 3. And so to have a QA tester come back with like too much guitar wank, I thought Marty O'Donnell was going to lose his mind. And he actually banned him from the audio department. He said that tester is no longer allowed to enter our room again. Sorry. That's the end of the line. So anyway, but these are the people that really help make your lives easy, IT and QA for sure. All right, so now moving on to the engine. These are the critical people. So the lead engineering folks, who's in charge of audio programming? That's a key question you got to answer. Sometimes it's nobody. Sometimes if it's somebody, they probably don't want to do it. And for them, it's just like that last task in their task sheet that says you have to support audio. But find out who the engineer is. Ideally, you have an engineer. At times, I haven't. And in which case, you're just borrowing, and stealing whatever you can. Yeah, get close with that person, and ideally, get a good working relationship with that person so they understand where you're coming from, and you can be very clear about the requests that you have. You need to ensure that WI's profiling is available in the shipping testing builds. You'd be amazed at how much this doesn't happen. So like right now, a game that I was just working on recently, I won't name any projects, Debbie will kill me. But in any case, the engineers stripped the profiling code out of the version of the game that they were testing, which means the game that they're testing that's the most performant, you actually can't profile with Wwise, which means you've just crippled me. I mean, you might as well cut me off at the knees if you're not going to allow the profiling code to be compiled into the working game. So anyway, you got to get somebody on that lead programming team to be your best friend and say like, look, you need to keep this code in until the very last minute, because otherwise we can't mix the game. Because when I say profiling, for those of you that don't know much about profiling in Wwise, profiling is not only telling you exactly what's happening at every single tick, shows you exactly in numbers, shows you all the errors, shows you everything, but also allows you to mix in real time. So you can be playing the game, and if you're connected, you can be like, that gun sounds a little loud. You can adjust it in real time while you're playing the game in Wwise, and then just hit save. Not that you're making a list and like going back and making changes later. You can change it while you're playing the game. And that is such a crucial advancement in the past 10 or 20 years. It's big. But if some lead programmer is going to strip out that code so they can get their extra 5 frames a second, Right now, it's like, I'm sorry, we need this code in the engine right now because otherwise we cannot appropriately test the game. And you'll get your 5 frames back later, but you just let the game run at 55 frames for right now, please. 55 is fine. Like, you don't need to get greedy. Another one to advocate to this group, which is frequently overlooked all the time for me right now. If you don't know what PI is, if it doesn't immediately tell you that it stands for Play in Editor, which means that if you're actually working on the game, you're generally speaking, I'm working on a play in editor. I'm not like building the game, which may take hours, and then playing an actual shipping version of the build. I'm playing in Unity, or I'm playing in Unreal, or I'm playing in whatever my engine is. I'm doing my stuff, and then I'm playing the game here, and that's called play in editor. So you're actually just playing the game, and it's on your PC. And you need to really, really impress on the PI performance. Because if I'm trying to work on a game and I'm only getting 10 frames a second, it's really hard to tell exactly what's working right and what's working wrong when the performance is so terrible that I can't actually discern whether I actually have a problem or not. So yeah, PI performance is a big issue. These are all the things that you need to get good relationships with your lead engineers on, because they're the ones that hold the keys. The guy at the top of the engineering food chain is the one that's going to make decisions about what code gets compiled and what code doesn't. And you really want him to support you in being able to keep the wise code in at the entire time. Yeah, so again, play in editor is where we do the bulk of our work, generally speaking. Also, early on in a project, and I've made this mistake, I'll give a funny one in a second, you should take as much space as possible, as early as possible. And this one's probably a little bit off color, but this is my pee on your territory bit. I've made the mistake before where I've told people like, hey, this project's sort of a mess right now, so I'm just gonna disconnect everything, but I'm gonna need all this space back later. And they're like, yeah, sure, that's fine. And then when you come back later, they're like, yeah, sorry, that bus left. So try to get in as much representative work as you possibly can into the game as you go, so that you keep your performance and your disk usage and your CPU usage, so on and so forth. You keep that as consistent as possible all the way throughout. What you don't want to do is you don't want to go later and say like, oh, I want to put in convolution reverb now, because any of us that love reverbs, of course we want to use convolution reverb. Who wants to use the WI's reverb? Sorry, Max. But you know, I know you didn't. But you don't want to add convolution reverb in the 10th month. You know, you should put that in early so that they understand that, yeah, that's a couple % more CPU than a cheap reverb. Start using the expensive ones early on. You can horse trade, you can make negotiations later about how to improve your frame rate necessarily. But if you wait to put in all of your heavy lifting stuff until the very end, the art guys are gonna get in there. So make sure you get your stuff in before the art guys start getting fancy, because once they start adding specular shading and Z mapping and Z brushing, huda hada, whatever their stuff is, once they start adding all their stuff late in the game, they're definitely going to be putting the hurt on the CPU usage. So you don't want to be upping your thing at the same time. So get as much of your stuff in as early as you possibly can. All right, a bit of a discussion of CPU versus GPU. So I assume everyone knows the GPU is a graphics processing unit, CPU is the other one. All of audio lives on the CPU. I don't remember how much I have here. Audio takes place on the CPU, and art chicanery happens on the GPU, generally. So these things generally don't talk terribly well together, so you can't usually refer to information that's being generated on the GPU side to use on the CPU side. But there are tricky ways that you can go about it. So I'll talk self-luminosity for a second, because this is one of the ways that I've done it most successfully. So artists love blinking lights. I don't know what it is, but for some reason they like lights that don't work terribly well, that they like to flicker in the background. You can't get at that flicker on the CPU, but if you can go find it in the shader, you generally can copy that function and be able to paste it on the CPU side. And even though the GPU and CPU don't really talk to each other, they're usually running off the same clock. So just Never take no for an answer. Just because something's on the GPU side doesn't mean you can't get it to work on the CPU side. You just might have to, do a little bit of extra heavy lifting, and may need to call in a few favors from some of the artists to help you manage to get to that part. But just because art takes place on GPU and audio talks on CPU doesn't mean that they can't talk together at all. It just makes it a little bit more difficult, and you should identify those things early on. Like blinky lights, self-luminosity is a big one, but you could probably think of a few others as well that art guys might do that you may want to tag into. Just these are the things that you should try to seek out and try to find solutions for as early as possible. All right, I'm going to move on to art and animation for a bit. So environments. This is art is one of those environments is one of those that I get in early and I plan for multiple passes. Unlike, say, hey, here's a weapon and it has 20 reload or 20 different animations for reloading or for, blah, 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 for drawing, so on and so forth. As soon as I have those 20 animations, I'm happy to work on all 20 of those animations, finish it, ship it, done. Environments, not so much, because environments are a long haul process. It starts with them really massing out an area, and then environment artists tend to get more and more particular and more granular as they go, which I want to do the same thing. So I tend to look at a level initially and say, what is the largest percentage of whatever this level is? Let's say it's 80% outside on the beach. I'm like, great. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a really compelling ambience that's outside on the beach with details, with the whole 9 yards, and make it so that 80% of the level is going to sound just fine. And I'm going to wait on that last 20% until they finish making the buildings. Oh God, that wasn't me, was it? Sorry. The 20% can wait, because until they finish making the buildings, you don't want to draw all those boxes or create how to figure out into all those spaces until they're done. But you do want the data being loaded, and you do want to start setting up reverbs, and you do want a solid, you do want ambience playing. So you get it playing, and I just say, take that first largest percentage footprint, and you do it with bass loops and details and not sound points. A lot of people tend to go to sound points first. I don't, because sound points, they're not expensive, but they're not free. So if you put a 3D position thing, that's a 3D voice that the CPU is going to have to deal with. So I tend to not go that path. I tend to make a nice group of bass loops and then a whole piles of details that just can trigger randomly in random directions, random distances, just so that there's action in there. But no sound points yet, because the sound points for me are going to be my last thing. Yeah, so again, cordon off and design smaller areas after the mass out is complete. Oh, sorry, I didn't finish my last one. So don't start with sound points, because you can finish with those later and use them sparsely. I started up a game that I started working on a couple years ago, and I started up the first level, and I found that they had 65 voices playing, and about 58 of them were sound points. That's before you even started playing the game. That's just like, start up the game, you got 58 voices playing. I'm like, nope, just don't go there. Like, you're shooting yourself in the foot, is what you're doing. Talk early and often with the art guys about big ticket items. And I can't emphasize enough about water. So if you've dealt with water in a game, water is probably the worst one, because the art guys and the audio guys are going to want to see a splash and hear a splash when anything happens, when it breaks the surface of the water. But for the most part, the game is also going to have a reaction to whatever surface is underneath that water. So if there's stone underneath the water, you're going to get a footstep that's going to create a splash and then a stone. And I don't want both. I want just the water. If it's over water, I want it to ignore the one underneath. This is all stuff that programmers need to help you with. Water is probably the most difficult one, I think. So file that away in your brain. I always going to want an RTCP for how deep the water is, so that I can have slappy water footsteps, and I can have ankle deep water footsteps, and I can have knee deep water footsteps, depending on the depth of the water. And I depend on the art team and everyone else to give that information back to me. Yeah, so utilize your sound points to add that final pass of polish. Once the artist finally decides they're going to add a waterfall over here, yeah, you're going to want a sound pass on that, or a sound point on that waterfall. But give the artist as much time as they need to get, to populate the area that they want to populate it, and use your sound point sparsely and effectively. And to, at times I've done stupid things like put sound points in every single tree I can find just because I want a little bird sound out of that particular tree. But why did I just populate 75 sound points in trees when I could just easily have a detail track that randomly triggers birdie sounds around me, and then I'm not wasting 50 points of 3D sound effect processing usage that's going to hurt your audio performance. All right, I don't remember what this one is. Oh yeah, animation, one of my favorites. This is the single largest body of work, generally speaking, in any game I've ever worked on. Usually, if you're dealing with any sort of first-person game or even third-person game, you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of animations. And most of the work traditionally, and I assume that most of you have done it this way as well, is you go into an animation and you attach a sound right here and it plays on that frame. Now, if the animator goes back and changes the animation, now you're screwed, because you didn't know they changed the animation, and unless you get notification of that, you're always looking over your shoulder. And looking over your shoulder back at the work you did before is one of my least favorite activities. I always want to actually move this way, because that's the way towards the finish line. Having to watch over my shoulder to what things got changed underneath me is distressing. So once the timing is final, I'm happy to just start and finish animations in one pass. But then you need a really solid relationship with that animation producer and the animators to make sure that they alert you if they have done anything nefarious along the way. So you need a system. And at times it's a very basic system. It's like we used to have like the mother of all animation graphs, where it just like once a week I'd meet with the animation producer and the lead animator and I'd say, what's changed? What have you guys checked in? Is this a change of and always know what changes that you care about. Do I care if he changes the angle of the hand? I don't care about that. But do I care if you move where the actual reload happens? I care about that for sure. Yeah, so being clear to your animators about what you care about. Like, you don't care about small shifts in their posture, in the poses or whatever. That's not your concern. Your concern is the major motion. We care about the timing of the primary actions. We don't care about the changing of the angle of hand placement. And don't reinvent the wheel. If possible, this is probably the most interesting thing that I've ever got working, that if you get one takeaway that you could take away to your team that you might like. So there's a thing called IK, which is the programming part of animation that allows the foot to pitch correctly based on the angle of the ground that they're stepping on. So if you're walking along here, the IK needs to know that, okay, if I'm on a flat surface, it keeps the foot like this. If I'm heading downhill, it will angle the foot like that to say I'm walking downhill and it wants the foot to fall correctly on the stuff, on the ground that it's on. So the best system that I ever developed, and this may or may not have been a Bungie game, but probably, is as long as we could tell the IK system to say, when you are adjusting the foot for an IK, call a footstep. And then I never have to go into the animations and actually place a footstep call. I'm tying into the IK. So if you can get that animation programmer to help the audio programmer make sure that they can get their coding to line up so that when an IK happens, it passes along what speed you're going. So are you running, walking, or crouching? And then the other one, which was really nifty that went along with it, is we also said, hey, at that point, you know when the next footstep is going to come. As coders, you know that if somebody's moving this fast, if they have this footstep and they're running, the next footstep is going to happen within, let's say, 7 frames, for lack of a better discussion. So I would use that same data that says, oh, okay, you're going to call a footstep on this IK. It's going to be only 7 frames to the next one, so play a short move Foley at the same time. Again, this is a call that I don't have to go into the animation to hook up. I just have a little table that says, if somebody's moving fast and we need short moves, play short moves. Medium moves, long moves, put them in as many different frame ranges as you want. Now, all of a sudden, if your IK is driving the whole thing, you're getting all your footsteps and all your Foley that is fully hooked up in the game and bulletproof for anybody making any changes. Because if they make changes, that same code is going to take care of it for you. And you don't have to go in and mark up a million animations to actually catch up with what the animators did. So don't reinvent the wheel as best you can. There's certainly ways that we all have to do repetitive work on top of other people's repetitive work, but if you can avoid it, this is a good one. On to design. Sorry, I'm checking on time. How are we doing? We're good. Almost done. So design's a big one, and you're going to have people that are on lots of different stuff. So I just tagged out weapons and vehicles and gadgets here, just for lack of a better term. But for weapons, you're going to need RCPs for sure. And you're going to need RCPs that may have things that may change the speed of reloads or any number of things. You're also going to need to know whether or not it's a single burst weapon or is it a looping weapon. What kind of Foley do you need for all the stuff? So weapons is a pretty big one. Again, making sure that you can get to the designers and making sure that you understand what they're thinking, what their goals are. This whole area in this page is the area that changes the most. So because all of a sudden they could be like, we don't want this gun to fire 10 frames a second, fire 10 rounds a minute. We want it to fire 60 rounds a minute. And I'm like, whatever. Those changes have big implications to sound designers. Somebody else can just change a number that can really not be helpful to us. So staying in touch with these folks is key. Same with vehicles. Also need RCPs here. You need to know where your RPM is, blending between different loops, or do you have an idle? Do you have low, medium, high RPMs, or are you just dealing with like a jet plane that everything's a unique flower when you get into the design area. And the designers love to change their minds in a real hurry. And I think that that's fine. I want those designers to make changes as much as they see fit to make a better game. And the key is being able to respond to the changes that they make without it getting terribly complicated. Gadgets are the one that scare me the most. Scare me the most for sure because they all change. So it's like, all right, if a gadget, I don't know, I could think of a million examples, I guess, but let's say they might have a gadget that's like, you can launch a camera that will go down the street and show you things, they might have an idea for some crazy gadget. But you never know whether or not that is the actual gadget that's going to make it in the game. I tend to leave these a little bit towards the end of the line. Let the designers figure it out exactly what they're going to do, put in placeholder at best. Because the gadgets, like I swear they change 100% from day to day. It's like, oh, that's not the gadget we're making this totally different thing. And you don't like to get surprised by those things. And I especially don't like to spend a lot of time as soon as somebody comes up with a cool gadget saying like, I'm gonna spend a week making sound for that gadget, to then have them 2 months later to say that gadget's cut and they've replaced it with another one. Just keep your eye on what the basket looks like, what the designers are thinking, and just be very communicative about when you wanna actually start preparing and getting the initial passes at it, to be able to get them to meet their goals, realizing that you are definitely going to do work that's going to get thrown away in this entire area. Gadgets, vehicles, weapons, all this stuff's going to change all the way up until the very end. There's really no getting around that. So just being as flexible as you possibly can is important. And having plans A, B, and C is always good too. All right, so far, I think of games, generally speaking, as a three-legged stool. And in this case, the seat is IT and QA, and the three legs are sound design and music and dialogue. So I've really only hit on sound design so far, so I'm gonna try briefly to hit a little bit on dialogue and music, and just chat about a little bit about my thoughts on those, but I'm just about at an hour, so I'm gonna try to wrap it up, but I'm happy to chat more about these subjects as we go. I have plans on bringing Bo, our compatriot from Blind Light, who is our dialogue studio at Blind Light. I have plans on having him join me on some future iterations of this talk so we can even more dive into dialogue. But I'll just give you some general thoughts. They're both sort of the same. For music and dialogue, how many here are actually, I don't even need to raise hand, it doesn't matter. But I happen to be a musician, oboe player, classically trained guy, and a sound designer. But not everybody is. You know, some people, so find your role. What is your role for both of these tasks? Since I would say that most audio directors are more bent towards the sound design and tech implementation side, it's probably a little bit of a generalization, but figure out what your role is and stay in it. So I knew at Bungie, Marty O'Donnell was a composer, but I was a player. So I would always review all of his parts before we hit the stage, before we hit the recording studio, because me as a player, he wrote a piece in 13/8. And I said, dude, as a player, I don't want to read this in 13/8. I said, really, and if I listen to the piece and I look at the music, I want to see alternating 6/8 and 7/8. And so he made the change, and they printed out all the, and I guarantee all the musicians in that room were a lot happier that it wasn't in 13/8. But so it's knowing what I can help Marty with, and I can't tell him how to write a melody. He's plenty good at that himself. But there are things that I can help him with, and realizing what your role is, what's expected of you, and delivering on that side is big. But so for music, yeah, who's writing? Oh, sorry, I put casting in the wrong one here. Casting should have been in the lower one. Finding out who's doing all of the steps here is crucial. Who's writing, who's casting, who's directing, who's implementing. I've done all of those. I've done some writing, I've done a lot of directing, I've done a lot of casting, but it's not, everybody's not an actor, and that's not everybody's specialty. So again, figuring out who are, where your roles are, what's the most you can bring to the table, and bring that to the table. And make sure that you figure out where all of the other pieces are coming from. Because all this stuff can get pretty complicated. The sound design part is relatively straightforward. You get a gun, you figure out a place to hook up the firing. When you get into, especially these days, when you get into dialogue with performance capture, including facial, performance capture, lip sync, so on and so forth. I mean, all this stuff gets incredibly complicated. A big project I'm working on at the moment is basically about assembling all those pieces again. I've got performance capture, I have facial capture, I have dialogue, and I need to make them all work together. And that's it becomes much more and more difficult the longer we go, because the technology just keeps improving. So yeah, I think don't feel like that you have to be an expert in all three of the legs. I would strongly urge everyone to figure out what legs that you're good at. I'm certainly better at the sound design and dialogue legs than I am at the music leg. I've written 2 pieces of music for Need for Speed 2. I hated both of them, and I vowed that I would never write music for a game again. So, although somebody just poked me on LinkedIn the other day, so it's like, hey, remember that song you wrote on Need for Speed 2? And I'm like, no, you didn't remind me. Like, no, I don't want to think about that. So yeah, I think it's really about figuring out where your strengths are. And really making sure that everyone else knows what your strengths are and realizes that you are strong in those things. And it's really hard for audio to break through the glass ceiling sometimes. I think that audio is generally, I don't want to say a second-class citizen, but sometimes we are. They just put audio off in the corner and they say, yeah, you guys will figure it out, don't worry about it. But I want to make sure that to evangelize audio as being, like I said at the top, it's half. And we can make a game great, or we can ruin a game by doing audio well or poorly. So I choose the former, of course, and just choose to work as best as I can with everybody. And my perfect reviews on any game is if they don't really say anything, because that means I did my job right. That means that everything fit. And that's just fine. Is it always nice to get the occasional call out? Sure. But that's not what I'm here for. What I'm here for is to make games sound right. And that's a hard challenge from the technical side. But it's something that everyone recognizes when they hear it and they play the game and they're like, wow, that was a perfect experience. That's gratifying, and just as much as it is. So I've reached the end of what I had prepared. I'm happy to take questions if anybody's got questions.